Jerome Wade was 44 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in October, he believed his quiet, steady life was exactly what he had built it to be. He was a hospital facilities supervisor, the man who fixed things nobody upstairs noticed were broken. His wife Lydia was a hospital administrator, polished and climbing, and Jerome had never once resented her success. For 11 years he had been her foundation, reliable, overlooked, underestimated by everyone, including her. That afternoon, Jerome checked his phone on his lunch break and matched all 7 numbers on a lottery ticket he had bought every Tuesday for 12 years. $50 million. His very first thought was her face. So he ran across that hospital to show her. He reached her office. The door was partially open. He raised his hand to knock. And then he heard it. His wife's voice, breathless, unmistakable, and a man answering her. Jerome lowered his hand. He did not open that door. He turned around, walked back down the hall, and drove home in complete silence. $50 million in his chest, and a decision forming that Lydia never saw coming. She had no idea what she had just lost. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The fluorescent light had been flickering for exactly 7 days. Jerome Wade watched it from his usual spot in the basement mechanical room, sandwich balanced on his knee, counting the irregular pulses. 1, 2, pause, 3, 4, pause, like a broken heartbeat. No one from administration had mentioned it yet, which didn't surprise him. People upstairs rarely notice things until they stopped working completely. He took another bite of his turkey and Swiss, methodically chewing while studying the light fixture. The basement mechanical room wasn't much. Concrete walls, pipes running along the ceiling like metal veins, the steady hum of machinery. But it had been his lunch spot for the past 11 years. Something about the solitude felt right. Down here, he could think. His radio crackled. "Wade, you copy." It was Marcus from his crew. "Go ahead," Jerome responded, his voice carrying the same steady calm it always did. "Got a backed-up sink in the East Wing cafeteria. Nothing urgent. I'll handle it after lunch. Tell them 30 minutes. Copy that, boss." Jerome stood, brushing crumbs from his Navy maintenance uniform. The flickering light caught his attention again. He could fix it now. It would take less than 10 minutes. But technically, it wasn't on today's work order. Nobody had complained. Still, the irregular pattern nagged at him. With a quiet sigh, he retrieved his tools and stepladder. Some things you did because they needed doing, not because anyone asked. That had always been his way. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to Lydia. 8 months into her new position as Director of Administrative Operations, and sometimes it felt like they were speaking different languages. The promotion had changed things, not dramatically, but in small ways that added up. Fewer shared dinners, less conversation, more nights when she worked late, coming home after he was already in bed. He understood pressure. He did. But lately, it felt like more than that. The ballast needed replacing. Jerome's hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless similar repairs. He thought about this morning, Lydia rushing out the door, travel mug in hand, barely a goodbye. He told himself it was temporary, just until she settled into the new role. They'd find their rhythm again. The light hummed to life, steady and clear. Jerome allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction as he packed up his tools. He checked his watch. Still 15 minutes left in his lunch break. Enough time to check the lottery numbers from last night's drawing. It was his Tuesday ritual. Same 7 numbers every week for the past 12 years. His mother's birthday. His and Lydia's anniversary date, the year Detroit won the championship. He pulled out his phone, navigating to the lottery website with familiar taps. The numbers appeared on screen. 07, 13, 19, 24, 31, 42, 55. Jerome stared at the screen, blinked, checked his ticket, looked back at the screen. All 7 numbers matched. The basement seemed to tilt slightly. He gripped the edge of his stepladder, steadying himself. The Michigan Mega Jackpot. $50 million. After taxes and taking the lump sum, about $28.4 million. His first coherent thought wasn't about the money. It was Lydia's face. He could picture it so clearly. The way her eyes would widen, that surprised laugh she used to have. When was the last time he'd surprised her? Really surprised her? With hands that were surprisingly steady, Jerome called the lottery commission. The woman who answered was professional, efficient. She verified his numbers, confirmed the win, advised him he had 180 days to claim, suggested he seek legal counsel before going public. Jerome thanked her politely, ended the call, sat in perfect stillness beneath the now steady light. He should wait. Should talk to a lawyer first. Should make a plan. But something in him couldn't wait. He needed to see Lydia's face. Needed to give her something that would crack through the professional shell she'd built these past months. Needed to remind her of who they were before titles and promotions and late nights at the office. He completed his afternoon rounds with methodical precision. Fixed the cafeteria sink. Helped Marcus troubleshoot a faulty air handler. Answered 3 maintenance calls, all while carrying $28 million in his pocket. At 5:15, he took the elevator to the administrative floor. His work boots squeaked slightly on the polished tiles, a sound that always made him feel slightly out of place up here. But today was different. Today, everything was different. He turned down the familiar hallway toward Lydia's office, anticipation building with each step. Her assistant's desk was empty. Brianna usually left at 5. The outer office lights were dimmed. Jerome's footsteps echoed softly in the administrative wing's hallway. The cleaning crew hadn't come through yet. Their cart stood abandoned near the water fountain, the smell of disinfectant hanging in the air. He adjusted his collar, suddenly aware of the work dust on his uniform. But it didn't matter now, did it? 28 million had a way of making everything else seem small. He'd rehearsed the words on his way up. Lydia, remember those Tuesday tickets? Simple, direct. He could already picture her expression changing as understanding dawned. Maybe she'd laugh that old laugh, the one from their early days, before promotions and pressure and growing silence across dinner tables. The lottery ticket felt warm in his pocket, like it was alive with possibility. He touched it briefly, reassuring himself it was real. All those years of the same numbers, his mother's birthday, their anniversary, the year Detroit showed the world what it could do. The administrative wing was different at this hour. During the day, it hummed with importance, clicking heels, urgent conversations, the rustle of papers and soft chime of elevator doors. Now it felt abandoned, most offices dark behind their glass walls. Brianna's desk sat empty, her computer screen black, her cardigan draped over her chair. She always left precisely at 5, efficient even in her departures. Jerome approached Lydia's office. The door was partially open. Not enough to see inside, just a wedge of light spilling onto the carpeted hallway. He could smell her perfume, the new one she'd started wearing recently. "Just for myself," she'd said when he'd noticed. His hand rose to knock. Then he heard her voice. The sound stopped his knuckles an inch from the wood. Not her words. Her sound. A specific kind of breath catching that he knew from 11 years of marriage. His arms stayed frozen, suspended between motion and stillness, while his mind tried desperately to reject what his body already understood. "Please," he thought, "please let me be wrong." A man's voice came through the gap. "You feel so good." Low, satisfied, possessive. The kind of voice that knew it owned what it was touching. Jerome's hand lowered slowly to his side. He stood there, perfectly still, while the world rearranged itself around him. The lottery ticket burned against his thigh. 20 minutes ago, it had felt like a key unlocking their future. Now it felt like a cruel joke, running across the hospital with a miracle, only to find his wife making love to another man. He did not open the door, did not need to see what he could hear with devastating clarity. Instead, he stepped back, turned, and walked away with the same measured pace he'd approached with. His boots made no sound on the carpet. The stairwell door closed behind him with a soft click. He descended 11 flights mechanically, counting steps the way he counted everything. At the bottom, he collected his bag from his locker, clocked out, and walked to his car. His hands were steady on the steering wheel all the way home. The driveway looked the same. The house looked the same. Everything looked exactly as it had this morning, when the world still made sense. Jerome sat in his car, engine off, staring at the garage door he'd repainted last summer. Lydia had helped him choose the color. He cried then, briefly and quietly, his forehead resting against the steering wheel. He allowed himself exactly 5 minutes. Then he wiped his face, got out of the car, and went inside to make dinner. The kitchen light clicked on. Chicken was thawing in the fridge. He'd taken it out this morning, planning to make Lydia's favorite recipe. He considered throwing it away, then decided against it. Instead, he moved through the familiar motions, seasoning, preheating, preparing sides. The routine felt strange, like speaking words in a language he'd just discovered was dead. At 7:15, he heard her key in the lock. Lydia entered, freshly composed, hair smoothed, lipstick perfect, professional mask firmly in place. She smiled the smile she'd been giving him for months now. The one he suddenly understood was crafted from guilt rather than distance. "How was your day?" she asked, setting down her purse. "Fine," he said, and his voice sounded normal. "Dinner's ready." They ate. She commented on the chicken. He nodded. After dinner, she settled on the couch with her tablet, the blue light reflecting off her glasses. Jerome sat in his chair and held a book he wasn't reading, watching the words blur on the page. When they went to bed, Lydia fell asleep quickly, her breathing evening out into familiar patterns. Jerome lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, feeling the lottery ticket in his nightstand drawer like a living thing. He did not sleep. In the darkness of their bedroom, Jerome listened to Lydia's steady breathing beside him. The clock on his nightstand showed 1:17 a.m. in harsh red numbers. He hadn't moved in hours, afraid that any shift might wake her, might force him to pretend everything was normal for even one more minute. His mind worked methodically through the past 2 years, assembling pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. The Chicago Healthcare Conference 14 months ago. She'd taken an extra day, claimed she wanted to visit the Art Institute. "Just for myself," she'd said, the same words she'd used about the new perfume 6 months later. Chanel something. He'd noticed it because it was different from the vanilla scent she'd worn since they'd met. The late evenings started gradually, first once a week, then twice, always with perfect explanations, budget meetings, staff reviews, system upgrades that could only happen after hours. He'd made dinner those nights anyway, wrapped her portion in foil, left it warming in the oven. Sometimes it was still there in the morning. 2:03 a.m. Jerome remembered the family cookout last summer, how Lydia had stepped away to take a call. He'd thought nothing of it then. Now he wondered if that was when Aunt Patricia had overheard whatever made her face tighten whenever Lydia's name came up these past months. The contempt had been so subtle at first. Little comments about his uniform, about the hospital hierarchy, about ambition. He'd absorbed them, thinking she was just stressed about her promotion. Now he understood. She'd needed him to be less than he was. Her guilt had required his diminishment to justify what she was doing. 3:22 a.m. He traced back through bank statements in his head. Joint accounts, shared credit cards, retirement funds they'd built together over 11 years. The lottery ticket in his nightstand drawer felt like a time bomb. 28 million reasons to move carefully. The legal implications started arranging themselves like parts in a mechanical system. Michigan was an equitable distribution state. He remembered that from when his cousin got divorced. Without proper protection, without documentation, without a clear strategy. 4:30 a.m. Two decisions crystallized with absolute clarity. He would not confront Lydia yet, and he would not claim that ticket while she was still legally his wife. He needed a lawyer. He needed someone who understood both family and strategy. He needed Aunt Patricia. Jerome reached for his phone, moving slowly to avoid disturbing Lydia. He typed 3 words, "I need you." 11 minutes later, he counted them. His phone vibrated. He slipped out of bed and into the hallway before answering. "Jerome?" Patricia's voice was alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" He told her everything. The lottery numbers, the walk to Lydia's office, what he heard through the door, the dinner he made afterward. His voice stayed steady, factual, like reporting a maintenance issue. Patricia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How much did you win?" 28.4 million, after taxes." Another pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had the precise tone he remembered from childhood emergencies. Calm, clear, brooking no argument. "Listen to me very carefully. Don't touch that money. Don't say one word to her. Meet me at 8 a.m. I know a law firm. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good boy. Now get some sleep." Jerome didn't sleep. He showered at 5:30, before Lydia's alarm. The water pressure was low, something he'd been meaning to fix. The normalcy of noticing it almost broke him. He left for work early, the same time he always did. The hospital's morning shift was starting. Nurses ending their nights, doctors beginning their rounds, custodial staff finishing up. Jerome nodded to familiar faces, his expression giving away nothing. In the maintenance office, he reviewed work orders, assigned tasks to his crew, and began his own rounds. Check the boiler pressure, test the backup generators, replace fluorescent tubes in the pediatric wing. His hands remained steady, his movements efficient. No one looking at him would have known he was carrying $28 million and the wreckage of his marriage inside his chest. He was just Jerome Wade, facilities supervisor, doing his job, the same way he had every morning for 11 years, just another Tuesday, except for everything. Jerome pulled into the parking lot of Aldridge & Bow at 7:55 a.m. The building was red brick, 3 stories tall, with brass letters mounted above the entrance. Aunt Patricia was already waiting, her silver Camry parked in the visitors section. She stepped out as he approached, wearing the navy suit she'd worn to his wedding. "You look tired," she said, pulling him into a brief hug. "Didn't sleep." "Wouldn't expect you to." She straightened his collar, a habit from when he was young. "Ready?" The lobby was quiet, walls lined with legal texts and framed credentials. A young receptionist directed them to the 3rd floor. Raymond Aldridge's office had a view of downtown Detroit, though the blinds were partially drawn against the morning sun. Aldridge himself stood as they entered, tall, trim, with gray at his temples, and reading glasses hanging from his neck on a chain. His handshake was firm, assessing. "Mrs. Wade, Mr. Wade, please, sit." "Just Mr. Wade," Jerome said quietly. "That's why we're here." Aldridge nodded once, retrieving a legal pad. "Tell me everything." Jerome did, his voice steady. The lottery ticket, the office door, the distance that suddenly made sense. Aldridge took notes, his expression neutral. When Jerome finished, the lawyer removed his glasses and placed them carefully on his desk. "Michigan is an equitable distribution state," he began. "In a typical divorce, marital assets are divided based on multiple factors: length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, fault if proven, Lottery winnings obtained during marriage are generally considered marital property. Jerome felt something tighten in his chest. Aldridge held up one finger. However, if the funds are kept completely separate, never commingled with marital assets, and if we can establish that the marriage was effectively over when you won, we have grounds to protect those funds. But we need documentation, evidence of the affair, timeline of marital breakdown, proof that this wasn't just a momentary indiscretion, but a sustained betrayal. How long? Jerome asked. To build the case properly? 60 days minimum? We gather evidence, establish pattern, document everything, then we file. Aldridge leaned forward. Can you be patient that long? Jerome thought of 11 years of Tuesday tickets, of dinners left warming in the oven, of fixing things nobody noticed needed fixing. I've been patient my whole life. 60 days is nothing. Something like approval flickered across Aldridge's face. They spent the next hour discussing retainer fees, documentation requirements, and strategic timing. Jerome signed the engagement letter. He did not sign anything related to the lottery. After leaving Aldridge's office, Jerome drove to Comerica Bank and opened a new individual account. The teller was efficient, professional. Just another Tuesday transaction. No one knew he would soon be transferring millions through this simple checking account. Aunt Patricia insisted on lunch afterward. They found a quiet booth at a diner they'd gone to when Jerome was young. She waited until their coffee arrived before speaking. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, stirring cream into her cup. "Something I should have told you months ago." Jerome set his coffee down. Waited. "At the family cookout last summer. July. You remember?" He nodded. "Lydia took a phone call. Stepped away from the grill area. I was sitting behind the garage, reading. She didn't see me." Patricia's hands tightened around her cup. "I heard her say, clear as day, 'I can't talk right now. I'm with his family.' Not the family, or Jerome's family, his family. Like we were something separate from her." Jerome felt the timeline in his head shift again. 10 months. At least 10 months. I told myself I must have misheard. That maybe she was talking about work, or... Patricia shook her head. "I've been carrying that. I should have said something then. I'm sorry, Jerome." He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "Not your fault, Aunt Pat. Still, you deserve to know." "I know now." He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "That's what matters." That evening, Jerome cooked chicken and rice, the same meal he'd made 100 times before. Lydia sat across from him, talking about her day, about office politics, about plans for the weekend. He watched her speak, really looked at her, and saw what he hadn't let himself see for months, the careful performance of normalcy, the way she filled silence with words that meant nothing. 10 months, maybe more. He passed her the salt when she asked, answered her questions about work, cleaned the kitchen afterward, said nothing about Aldridge and Beau, about Patricia's revelation, about the new bank account, about any of it. Just another Tuesday dinner, except for everything he now knew. Jerome moved through his morning rounds with mechanical precision, checking systems and fixing issues that most people would never notice existed. The basement's newly repaired fluorescent light buzzed steadily overhead as he reviewed maintenance logs. Everything looked normal. Everything felt different. His tool belt hung familiar against his hip as he walked the hospital corridors. He'd traversed these halls thousands of times, but now his eyes caught details they'd previously passed over. Security camera placements, badge reader locations, the exact layout of the administrative wing's parking section. He wasn't just maintaining anymore, he was mapping. In the maintenance break room, he organized his toolbox with deliberate care. The morning crew filtered in and out, nodding hellos, respecting the quiet focus they'd come to expect from him. Jerome checked his watch. 10:15 a.m. Phyllis would be doing her mid-morning inspection of the East Wing mechanical systems. He'd known Phyllis Okafor for 6 years. She'd started in facilities maintenance the same month his father passed away. He remembered because she'd left a coffee on his desk that first week back. Said nothing about it, just nodded when he caught her eye later. That was Phyllis, observant, precise, and sparing with her words in a way that made the ones she chose matter more. Jerome found her in the East Wing mechanical room, clipboard in hand, methodically checking gauge readings. She didn't look up when he entered, finishing her current notation before acknowledging his presence. "How are the readings?" he asked, moving to check a nearby pressure valve. "Within range." She made another mark on her clipboard. "Second floor units running a little hot, but nothing critical." Jerome adjusted the valve slightly, waited. The quiet between them was comfortable, professional. Finally, he spoke again, his voice careful and even. "Phyllis, I need to ask you something." She set her clipboard down and turned to face him fully. "Waiting. You ever seen my wife with anyone?" The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Phyllis's expression didn't change, but her hands stilled completely on her clipboard. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before she answered. "Twice," she said finally. "In the parking garage, level B2. Jerome kept his voice steady. "When?" "First time was about 4 months ago. Second time was 3 weeks back." Phyllis picked up her pen, set it down again. "Dark green Audi A7. Not hospital staff. I know most of the administrative vehicles. This one had Grand Rapids plates." Jerome absorbed this. "You see the driver?" "Second time." Phyllis's eyes met his directly. White male, mid-40s, 6 feet approximately, athletic build, light brown hair, expensive haircut. Navy suit, no tie. Tan briefcase with silver hardware. Designer watch. Looked like a Rolex, but I was too far to be certain. He held the car door for her. Familiar gesture. Not their first time. The precision of her observation struck him. Phyllis had always noticed everything. It was what made her excellent at her job. She'd been holding this information, waiting to be asked. Time of day? Both times around 5:30 p.m. After most administration clears out. Jerome nodded once. "Thank you." Phyllis stepped closer, lowered her voice. The second time, he had a vendor badge. The kind they give pharmaceutical reps for scheduled meetings. That was the final piece. Jerome knew the hospital's vendor protocols. Pharmaceutical representatives had to register their visits, document their meetings, log their badge access. There would be records. He turned to leave. Phyllis's hand touched his arm briefly, a gesture of solidarity so quick it might not have happened. Then she picked up her clipboard and returned to her readings. Their conversation concluded as definitively as a door closing. Within the hour, Jerome had accessed the hospital's public vendor directory through his maintenance terminal. The pharmaceutical companies were listed alphabetically, with sales representatives assigned to each account. He found what he was looking for under Midwest Medical Solutions. Grant Holloway, Regional Sales Director, based in Grand Rapids, primary contact for hospital pharmaceutical contracts. Monthly scheduled meetings with administrative operations, Lydia's department. His company profile photo showed exactly what Phyllis had described. Mid-40s, athletic build, expensive haircut. The kind of man who would drive an Audi A7 and wear a Rolex. The kind of man who would hold a car door for someone else's wife in a basement parking garage at 5:30 p.m. Jerome closed the directory window. He had a name now, a face, a professional connection that created legitimate reasons for building access and scheduled meetings. Everything else, the timing, the car, the watch, the familiarity, was just confirmation of what he'd heard through that office door. He returned to his rounds, moving through the hospital's arterial systems with the same steady competence he'd always shown. But now he had another piece of the architecture. Not of the building's mechanics, but of his wife's carefully constructed, separate life. He saw Phyllis once more that day, passing in the corridor. She nodded professionally, He nodded back. They never spoke of it again. The morning sun filtered through Raymond Aldridge's office windows, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. Jerome sat in the same chair he'd occupied days before, his posture unchanged, his voice steady, as he relayed what Phyllis had told him about the green Audi and its driver. Raymond listened without interruption, making occasional notes. When Jerome finished, the attorney leaned back slightly. "This gives us a documented professional connection. That's useful. But we need more." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a business card. "I recommend we bring in someone who specializes in this kind of documentation. Bernadette Solis, former insurance fraud investigator, now private. She's methodical, discreet, and her findings hold up in court." Jerome studied the card. "How long?" "Give her 3 weeks. She'll build you a timeline that'll stand up to any scrutiny." Jerome nodded once and took the card. By that afternoon, he was sitting across from Bernadette Solis in her small but immaculate office. She was 49, sharp-featured, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She asked precise questions and took detailed notes. "I'll need 3 weeks," she said, echoing Raymond's estimate. "During that time, change nothing about your routine. Perfect normalcy is your best coverage." Jerome understood. For the next 3 weeks, he maintained exactly that. Perfect normalcy. He came home at his usual time. He asked about Lydia's day. He noticed when she mentioned being tired and offered to cook. He even fixed the loose cabinet hinge she'd complained about 2 months ago, the one that creaked whenever she reached for her coffee mug. Lydia noticed the hinge repair, commented on it over dinner. "You finally fixed it. Had some extra time," Jerome said, passing her the salt before she asked for it, the way he had for 11 years. Every evening, they performed their practiced domestic choreography. She watched her tablet shows. He read his books. They went to bed at their usual time. And every morning, somewhere in the city, Bernadette Solis accumulated evidence of the life that existed outside their careful routine. 3 weeks later, Jerome sat in Raymond's office again. Bernadette laid out her findings with professional precision, each document in a labeled folder, each claim supported by multiple sources. "The relationship began approximately 22 months ago," she said, opening the first folder. Grant Holloway was the pharmaceutical vendor lead on the hospital's medtech software rollout. Your wife was the administrative project lead. They had legitimate reason for regular contact. She produced hotel records, parking receipts, timestamps from badge access logs. The personal relationship developed within the first 2 months of the project. The second folder contained email records. 18 months ago, your wife created a secondary email account. Bernadette detailed the dating app activity, the correspondence patterns, the careful scheduling. A parking garage attendant had identified Lydia's photo without hesitation, remembered the green Audi. Then Bernadette opened the third folder, and Jerome felt something shift permanently in his chest. 8 months ago, your wife retained divorce counsel. She named the firm, provided consultation dates. Her most recent appointment was 3 weeks ago. The timing appears coordinated with an anticipated promotion to VP of Operations, which would significantly improve her financial position in a settlement. Jerome absorbed this in silence. Then he turned to Raymond. "If she had filed first, before I knew anything, what would she have gotten?" Raymond outlined it carefully. Michigan's equitable distribution laws, the length of the marriage, the timing of the lottery win, the claims her counsel could have made. The share would have been substantial. Jerome sat with this knowledge for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "She wasn't leaving me. She was harvesting me." Raymond didn't disagree. Jerome's next words were measured, final. "Then, we don't leave anything on the table." The drive home felt longer than usual. Jerome parked in his driveway and sat in the darkness of his car, looking at the house he'd maintained for 11 years. The porch light was on. Lydia must be home. Through the kitchen window, He could see her moving around, probably starting dinner. 22 months. Almost 2 years of coming home to this house, fixing things, buying lottery tickets, lying beside her in their bed. 8 months of her planning an exit strategy, timing it to extract maximum value. The quiet rage he felt wasn't at the affair itself. It was at the calculation behind it. The patient, methodical way she'd planned to strip him down to whatever she could legally take. He sat in the car until his breathing steadied. Then he got out, walked up the familiar path, and entered his house to make dinner as usual. Because tonight, like every night for the past 3 weeks, was about perfect normalcy. The only difference was that now he knew exactly what that normalcy was costing him, and exactly what he intended to do about it. The morning light barely touched the Detroit skyline as Jerome entered Raymond's office. The past 3 weeks had crystallized everything. Now it was time to move. Raymond had the trust documents prepared, laid out precisely on his mahogany desk. "The Wade Family Trust," he explained, tapping the first page. "We've structured it to establish the clearest possible separation between your lottery winnings and any marital assets." Jerome studied the document carefully. "Aunt Patricia as primary trustee?" "Yes. Her background as a paralegal makes her ideal. She understands the legal implications, and her testimony about the cookout phone call helps establish the timeline of marital breakdown. We've also listed your brother Dion as secondary trustee." Jerome nodded. Dion had always been his most reliable support, even if they didn't talk as much as they should. His brother ran a small contracting business, struggling to keep crews working through Detroit's unpredictable construction seasons. "Once we file these papers," Raymond continued, "the Lottery Commission will process the claim through the trust. The funds will never touch any account connected to you and Lydia jointly. That's crucial." Jerome signed where indicated, his signature as steady as always. Raymond had already coordinated with the Lottery Commission. They would process everything within 48 hours. The money would exist entirely separate from the life Lydia thought she was managing. That afternoon, Jerome drove to Dion's work site, a small renovation job on the east side. His younger brother was supervising 2 workers, his truck parked at an angle that screamed temporary workspace. No permanent office, no real base of operations. "Need a minute?" Jerome said when Dion looked up. They walked to the truck, out of earshot. Jerome told him everything: the lottery win, the affair, the trust, all of it. Dion listened without interruption, his face going through a rapid sequence of emotions before settling into something solid. 30 seconds passed in silence. Then, "Tell me what you need." "Need you as secondary trustee on the family trust. And need you to know I'm about to make some moves." Dion nodded once. "I'm with you." Jerome had already identified the property. A small commercial building in a developing area, perfect for a contracting business to operate from. The trust purchased it in cash 3 days later. When Jerome handed Dion the keys, his brother's hands shook slightly. "This is yours to build from," Jerome said simply. Life at home continued its careful choreography. Jerome fixed things, cooked meals, maintained his shifts at the hospital. Lydia moved through their shared spaces with practiced ease, unaware that everything had shifted beneath the surface. Then came Saturday morning. Jerome was loading the dishwasher, a task he'd performed thousands of times in exactly the same way, when Lydia entered the kitchen. Her posture suggested she'd rehearsed this. "That's not how those bowls should go," she said, her voice carrying a practiced edge. Jerome continued loading, saying nothing. "This is exactly the problem," she continued. "We never go anywhere. We never do anything. You're content just existing here." Jerome straightened up slowly, studying her. He could see it now. The way she was building toward something, laying groundwork she thought he couldn't recognize. "Jerome," she said, her voice softening into something that would have felt genuine 3 months ago, I just don't think we want the same things anymore. I think we've grown apart." The words hung in the kitchen air. Jerome felt something settle into place. Not anger, not grief, but a pure, crystalline finality. She was finally making her move, trying to guide him toward the door she'd been preparing to open for 8 months. "Is there something specific you want to say to me, Lydia?" His voice was calm, steady. She faltered slightly, unprepared for direct confrontation. "No, I'm tired." Jerome nodded once. "Okay." He closed the dishwasher and walked toward the garage, his usual Saturday refuge. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Raymond's message was simple. "Documents are ready. Whenever you're ready." Jerome sat on his workbench, the phone heavy in his hand. 60 days of careful documentation. 60 days of maintaining perfect normalcy while building an unassailable legal position. 60 days of watching Lydia perform the role of his wife while planning to strip him down to whatever she could legally claim. He typed one word in response: "Tonight." Through the garage door, he could hear Lydia moving around the kitchen, probably feeling satisfied with how she'd managed the morning's conversation. She had no idea that her carefully planned exit strategy had just accelerated into something entirely beyond her control. Sunday morning arrived with a crisp October chill. Jerome woke early, moving through the house with practiced quiet, while Lydia slept. He picked up his phone and dialed Walter Chambers' number, knowing the retired postal worker would already be awake, probably reading his Sunday paper. "Walter? Good morning. Listen, I wanted to invite you and Gloria over for dinner tonight. Got something important to share with the family?" There was warmth in Walter's voice. There always had been. "Everything all right, son? Just want everyone together. Around 6?" After hanging up, Jerome called Dion and Patricia separately, keeping his voice low. Each conversation was brief, purposeful. When Lydia finally came downstairs, he was already preparing dinner ingredients. "My parents?" Lydia's confusion was evident. "Tonight? Thought it would be nice. Dion and Patricia are coming too." She studied him, trying to read something in his movements. "I have some work to catch up on." "It's important," Jerome said simply, continuing to chop vegetables. 6 o'clock. Throughout the afternoon, Jerome moved through the kitchen with methodical precision. A pot roast, Gloria's favorite. Fresh rolls, green beans with almonds, sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. The familiar rhythms of cooking settled him, gave his hands something to do, while his mind stayed focused on what was coming. Dion arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine. His eyes met Jerome's briefly. Steady, ready. Patricia followed shortly after, her presence filling the living room with its usual quiet authority. When Walter and Gloria arrived, Gloria immediately moved to hug Jerome, commenting on how wonderful everything smelled. They gathered around the dining room table, the same table where they'd shared countless Sunday dinners before, when everything was simpler. Jerome had set it carefully. His grandmother's tablecloth, the good plates, water glasses filled precisely 3/4 full. The conversation flowed naturally at first. Walter asked about the hospital's new wing construction. Gloria praised the tenderness of the pot roast. Dion and Patricia maintained perfect composure, contributing just enough to keep things moving. Lydia participated cautiously, watching Jerome with growing uncertainty. After the plates were cleared and dessert was served, Jerome stood. The room quieted immediately. He looked at each face around the table. The people who had been part of his life for 11 years, who had no idea how completely everything was about to change. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady. "I have 2 things to share." He paused, letting the moment settle. 6 weeks ago, I won the Michigan Mega Jackpot. After taxes, the lump sum comes to $28.4 million. The silence was absolute. Gloria's hand found Walter's arm. Dion kept his expression carefully neutral. Patricia watched Lydia, who had gone completely still. "The second thing," Jerome continued, reaching into his jacket, is that I've filed for divorce." He placed the papers on the table. Lydia stared at them, recognition dawning. She'd been served at her office that afternoon, but hadn't returned to collect them. "I know about Grant Holloway," Jerome said, his voice level. "I know it's been almost 2 years. I know you hired an attorney 8 months ago. I know you had a plan. I just had a different one." The color drained from Lydia's face. Walter Chambers set his fork down with deliberate care, the small sound impossibly loud in the frozen room. "I'm not doing this with you tonight, Lydia," Jerome continued as she opened her mouth to speak. "Tonight was for your parents, who deserve to hear the truth from me directly, because they've been kind to me for 11 years, and they didn't know what you were doing either." He turned to face Lydia fully, his voice remaining calm, but carrying an absolute finality. "I want you to understand something. I ran across this hospital to show you something beautiful. I know what I heard. I know what I walked away from that door with. And I want you to know, from this moment forward, not $1 of what I built, what I saved, what I won, and what I will ever earn belongs to you. That's not anger. That's just the truth of what you made this." Jerome folded his napkin carefully, placed it beside his plate. He turned to Gloria, who had tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for always being kind to me." He extended his hand to Walter, who gripped it firmly, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. Walter's stare at Lydia held the weight of every value he'd tried to instill, every expectation she'd betrayed. Gloria's soft weeping filled the silence, and Lydia, who had managed perceptions and narratives and truths for 22 months, sat motionless, stripped of every story she'd constructed, facing the undiluted consequences of choices she never expected to explain in this room, at this table, with these witnesses. The evening after the Sunday dinner, Jerome sat in his favorite chair in the living room, waiting. The house felt different now, every familiar surface holding the weight of what had been said at that dining room table, what could no longer be unsaid. When Lydia came down the stairs, she moved like someone approaching a witness stand. "Sit," Jerome said quietly. Not a command, just a statement. She sat on the couch across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The polished professional facade she wore at work had cracked, revealing something raw and uncertain beneath. "I have 2 questions," Jerome said. "After that, Raymond's office handles everything." Lydia nodded, a small, jerky motion. "When did you stop believing in us?" The directness of the question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. 3 years ago," she said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just leave then?" "I didn't know how." She twisted her wedding ring, the one Jerome had saved for 6 months to buy. Everything was so established. Our families, our routines, our life. I felt trapped by all the pieces of it. Jerome absorbed this, his face unchanged. And was any of it real at the end? Lydia's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her in months. "Grant made me feel like the version of myself I wanted to be. Ambitious, moving up, going places. And I made you feel safe," she whispered. "You made me feel safe. Until safe started feeling like settling." Jerome nodded slowly. "You could have just left, Lydia. That's all you had to do. Just leave. Tell me the truth and go. Instead, you made me live inside a lie for almost 2 years while you built your exit strategy. You let me keep fixing things, keep making dinner, keep believing, while you planned exactly how to take as much as you could when you were ready." He leaned forward slightly. "The lottery ticket was mine. 12 years of Tuesday tickets. It was always mine. Just like this house was mine. My work, my maintenance, my repairs. You didn't build anything here except a strategy for taking half of it." Lydia started to speak, but Jerome held up his hand. "Raymond Aldridge's office will be in touch with your attorney. That's all we have left to say to each other." He stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone on the couch with the ruins of 11 years surrounding her. The next morning, Raymond's call came early. Her attorney is taking an aggressive position on the lottery funds, arguing their marital property regardless of when you claimed them. And we have something we've been holding back. During the investigation, Bernadette documented email correspondence between Lydia and Grant. They explicitly discussed your finances, specifically strategies to ensure you received minimal assets in the divorce she was planning. Jerome sat very still, absorbing this final betrayal. Not just the affair, not just the secret attorney, but actively strategizing with her lover about how to leave Jerome with as little as possible. "Use all of it," Jerome said quietly. Raymond deployed everything. The 22-month affair timeline, Lydia's pre-existing divorce attorney, the email correspondence proving conspiracy to minimize Jerome's assets, and the clean trust documentation showing the lottery funds were never commingled with marital property. He filed a formal dissipation claim, arguing that Lydia's conduct, including the affair and the coordinated financial planning with Grant, constituted actionable waste of the marital estate. The documentation was comprehensive, irrefutable, and devastating. 48 hours passed in tense silence. Then Raymond called again. Lydia's attorney had advised her to settle. The terms were absolute. Lydia would receive nothing from the lottery, nothing from the house, nothing from 11 years of marital equity. She would walk away with only her personal accounts, her car, and her salary. "She's signed," Raymond said simply. Jerome nodded, though Raymond couldn't see it. "Thank you," he said, and hung up. A gentle October breeze swept across Jerome's new porch, carrying the crisp scent of fallen leaves. He sat in a handmade wooden chair, watching the neighborhood he'd grown up seeing only from bus windows and careful distance. The houses here had always represented something just out of reach, not mansions, but solid homes where people built lives with room to grow. Now, on a Tuesday afternoon, he belonged here, not because of the lottery, though that had opened the door, but because he'd finally learned to value what he'd always been worth. He checked his watch out of habit, remembering all those Tuesday lunch breaks. For 12 years, he'd bought his ticket like clockwork, finding something private and hopeful in that small ritual. Today, he felt no urge to continue the tradition. The ritual had served its purpose, not just in the winning, but in showing him exactly who he was when everything broke open. His phone buzzed. A text from Dion, with photos of their newest work truck. Pristine white, with Wade contracting, in bold letters along the side. The fourth in their fleet. Jerome smiled, remembering how his brother's hands had shaken when they'd signed the lease on their building 8 months ago. Now they ran 2 full crews, with Dion managing operations and actually paying himself a real salary for the first time in his contracting career. Another message came through, this one from Aunt Patricia, showing him the final confirmation for her March flights to Ghana. She'd talked about visiting the coast there since Jerome was a kid, always putting it off because something else needed fixing. Someone else needed help. The photo showed her beaming, holding up her passport. Some dreams, Jerome had learned, just needed the right moment to bloom. He set his phone down and looked at the scholarship announcement from his old high school. 3 students a year would get full rides to trade programs, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, whatever path they chose. He'd insisted on keeping his name off it, letting it stand as simply the Trade Futures Fund. The first recipients would start next fall. The neighborhood grapevine had kept him informed about the aftermath, though he never went looking for those stories himself. Grant Holloway's wife Diane had received Raymond's professional courtesy notification about the documented vendor relationship. Their marriage ended within weeks. Grant's company, facing liability concerns over the conflict of interest, didn't renew their hospital contract at the next cycle. Lydia remained in her director position, but the VP promotion she'd built her plans around evaporated during the HR review triggered by the vendor investigation. Her professional capital, so carefully accumulated, had turned to smoke. She still walked those administrative hallways, but the trajectory she'd betrayed everything for had stalled permanently. Jerome stood up and walked inside to his garage workshop. Wood shavings covered the floor around his latest project, a coffee table in progress. His first completed piece stood in the living room, a dining table that had taken 6 weeks to build. It wasn't perfect. The joints showed his learning curve, and one corner sat ever so slightly higher than the others. But it was entirely his, built by his hands with no one else's approval needed. He ran his fingers along the edge of the coffee table he was working on, feeling the spots that still needed smoothing. Woodworking had found him gradually over the past year. Something about the patience of it, the way wood told you exactly what it was and wasn't willing to be. His phone buzzed again. Renee, asking if he was still up for dinner tomorrow. They'd met through a neighborhood association meeting 3 months ago. She ran a small bookkeeping business and had laughed genuinely at his dry observation about the treasurer's report. She thought he was funny, which still surprised him sometimes. They were taking things slowly, carefully, with the wisdom of people who knew both the value and the cost of building something real. Jerome traced a knot in the wood, feeling its natural interruption of the grain. He'd spent 44 years being the man who fixed things quietly and expected nothing back. That hadn't been wrong, exactly. But he'd learned something essential in the past year. Patience alone couldn't protect you from someone who had already decided to waste it. All the quiet competence in the world wouldn't save you if you let others set your price. He picked up his sander, considering the next step in shaping this table. He knew his worth now, down to the last decimal place. He was done letting anyone else appraise him. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.